Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. He's an adjunct professor at SFU's Faculty of Health Science and assistant professor at UBC's Faculty of Medicine and runs his own private practice. He consults to the Center for Applied Research in Mental Health and Addiction and was the primary author of a 2010 report commissioned by the Men's Health Initiative BC entitled Roadmap to Men's Health. I think we actually read over that and used some of the research and wording to help inform us how to best write the SFU Center proposal. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dan Bilsker.
I can do 6 minutes. So, I spent 25 years as a psychologist in the emergency psych unit at Vancouver General. In the course of that time, sat and met with thousands of suicidal people, acutely and mentally suicidal people, and no point in that whole experience was it really talked about that 80% of suicide deaths are men. And suicide is largely a male problem. Women attempt suicide far more often, but when men decide to kill themselves, they use methods like hanging. They just are definitively going to die. There's none of this seeking help stuff or drawing attention to suffering, none of that stuff. It's more about dying. That remarkable fact, which changes the whole way one should think about suicide, was never talked about or addressed. There was never any particular focus on men's issues like suicide or despair and so forth and what that might look like for men. It really came home to me when I was commissioned to write this report for something called the Men's Health Foundation, an overview of men's health. And I got the great opportunity to meet with the experts in all aspects of men's health and the different hospitals. I talked to the prostate cancer experts and different kinds of heads of departments to do with everything from bone health to cancer to whatever, and got a really nice overview. And my question was, why do men die before women? Why do men on average die 4 years before women? And one of the major contributors, surprisingly, was suicide, because even though it doesn't happen that often, the years of life lost, which is a statistic that is used to describe what premature death takes away from you, is enormous, because a man who kills himself at 20 has just lost an entire lifetime worth of years. So it contributes quite a bit to that average of why men die earlier. Cardiovascular illness, heart attacks hitting men at 55 instead of 10 years later for women. Those are relevant as well. And of course, what cannot be underestimated is the impact of alcohol. Alcohol overuse and abuse is infinitely more prevalent in men, although the advertisers and marketers are working hard to make sure women suffer just as much from the impact. Alcohol is one of those mischievous little things that runs through an enormous range of our health problems. And because men are far more likely to be overusing alcohol, they're far more likely to die in motor vehicle accidents, right? The majority of young people who die in motor vehicle accidents, of course, are male. It affects suicide, because someone who is in despair and drinking heavily is far more likely to do something to end their life. It's just wicked. It affects heart disease. It affects almost everything. Once walked through the hospital with an administrator who said, about a third of these beds are alcohol, which was an amazing statistic. So that's something that it has been differentially associated with men, and one of the ways that men suffer. So these all came home to me in very interesting ways. A lot of my work after I left the hospital has been developing self-care teaching modules, self-care workbooks that are free download off our website for adolescents, for adults, and the workplace, etc. And we've had maybe 400,000 copies of those downloaded. But what's a common finding in self-care workshops, teaching people to cope more effectively with psychological issues, is that it's much more likely to be women who attend the workshops, who learn the skills, who are interested in doing this. Much harder to get men engaged in this concept. And yet it's men who have a lot to learn about psychological coping with suffering, because that's one of the common issues that runs through. So if men learn more about coping with suffering and learn to cope with suffering related to relationship breakup, to work problems, to financial issues, if men dealt with it differently than the most common way they report in studies, which is drink more, it could really be powerful. It could reduce the amount of despair men suffer without speaking about it or seeking help. It could reduce the kind of problems they get into through substance use. It could reduce the suicide rate. A lot of things could happen if we were able to change the way men cope with suffering And a center like this is in a great position to do that, to offer the kind of teaching we know is really effective in helping people to cope more effectively with relationships, with their own thinking internally in terms of appropriate and adaptive interpretations, with behavioral goal setting. It's a whole range of skills that psychologists have shown through decades of research are quite effective. Now, one place you might learn it if you happen to go in for cognitive behavioral therapy, but it turns out you can really teach these skills at a population level. And teaching these skills in particular to men, engaging men in that process of learning these skills would simply be one of the most powerful population health interventions I could imagine. And a really good time to start that would be at a university. When men are forming their identities, they're forming the way they deal with relationships, the way they deal with work, the way they deal with spirituality. All sorts of things are being worked out and determined at that time, which subsequently can become quite fixed and much more difficult to shift. So a center like this that has the opportunity to run training and workshops and groups that teach men to do things like collaborative problem solving. So when women talk about their relationship issues or emotional issues with other women, it's not to vent. It's not just to hear yourself talk to get sympathy. It goes beyond that. You do collaborative problem solving. And if men don't talk about their concerns, their fears, their doubts, their relationship conflicts with other men, they don't get that collaborative problem solving, and they won't do it as well. So those are examples of the kind of skills that a center like this could offer, the peer support, the reaching out with others, collaborative problem solving, resilience skills that would be immensely powerful. So those are the potentials I see and why I would support this a lot. Thank you.
Our next speaker is the Executive Director of the BC Men's Resource Centre. The BC Men's Resource Centre is a privately funded organization established to promote the equality of men, women, and children in society, and is one of the longest running organizations in Vancouver, continuing to provide specialized resources for men. So please please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Arthur-Wong.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you all. Well, it has been several decades since I first started my university studies. Back in the day, in order to write a term paper, one had to go to the university's library card catalogs. Anybody knows about that? What I'm talking about? And those consisted of rows of drawers containing cards upon which, the name and the description and call number of the book. Back in the day, your typist was your best friend. Anybody knows about typewriters? Back then, there were no men's centers or groups. Over time, women's groups were established, followed by other groups that focused on social, religious, political interest. Today, technology has advanced way beyond the now extinct typewriter. Yet, there's still no men's groups or centers on campus. In preparing this address, I thought it would be a good idea to provide statistics about the needs of male university students. It's a men's center on campus. Consequently, I went to a website that is dedicated to providing and reporting on research on men's mental health and well-being. I did find some statistics from a study currently being undertaken by a consortium of Canadian universities. You would think, yeah, I've struck the pot of gold. But the statistics were unclear as to whether or not the data were referring to all students or to male students only. I decided to connect with the contact person for the research. And to my astonishment and disappointment, I was told that most likely the reported data on the website was for all students, not only male students. How does one make sense of this? A website for men's mental health reports on findings for all students, both male and female, and does not provide separate data for male students. What is going on here? Individuals like myself who want to help and advocate for male students are unable to use this data. Male students as well would find this information limited and not personally helpful. What is a male student to do? If he's feeling homesick, unhappy, unmotivated to study, or easily irritated, he might respond in one of two ways. First, he tries to keep his feelings to himself and isolates, not disclosing to anyone what he believes are weaknesses. Instead, he projects a strong and silent facade. Men don't complain or whine, he says to himself. A second way he might deal with his feelings is to form an attachment to a group of peers and follow what they do. Perhaps drinking to excess on weeknights, staying up late on weeknights, skipping classes, and not respecting others on or off campus. The purpose of a men's center is to provide a point of focus for both those who work with male students and for male students themselves. This is the key, a focus. Without a focus, two things occur. First, there's a dilution of purpose and energy. Similar to what I discovered on the website and the research. Results posted were in aggregate form. We do not know about the needs of male students separate from female students. What percentage of the male student body binge drinks? What is the prevalence of body image problems among male students? Are there more clinically depressed males than females? Alas, I do not know. We do not know. Second, without a focus, male students are forgotten and ignored. No space is allocated to them. Not even, it appears, on a website or in research, where that very website and research are supposed to be about them. Males are invisible. At times, it is as if they do not exist. I was therefore very encouraged to learn that an enthusiastic, dedicated, and proactive group of students had undertaken to propose a center for male students. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This center will be a place where men will feel comfortable acknowledging their personal and interpersonal struggles. This center will be a place to discuss the connection between sex and intimacy, among other topics. This center will be a place where socially appropriate behaviors are encouraged, expected, and modeled. It will be a place for research and outreach to males. And most important, it will be a beacon that reminds both the campus community and its surrounding community that men, too, need support and help. In summary, this is why there's a need for a men's center on campus. And this is what it will look like. And this is why I support the committee's proposal. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm going to present our next speaker. She's an assistant professor in SFU's Faculty of Criminology. In 2011, she was awarded a scholarship from the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, and her PhD thesis focused on the study of intimate partner violence, where she found 200 studies that document equal rates of IPV perpetration by women and men. Today, she's working towards correcting the record through research that intimate partner violence is not a gendered problem, and that male victims are also faced with little to no resources to help them today. Please welcome Dr. Alexandra Lysova.
So thank you so much for inviting me. So I guess everything in what I'm doing and what I've studied back in Russia. So I came from Russia to Canada 6 years ago. After I graduated from the university in Russia, I guess I was interested, as many in the issue of violence, we're interested in the issue of violence against women. This is what I've heard of, people studied in the West, so this is what I wanted to study in Russia. But I quickly realized this is not the full story. We need more, and the problem was not only with violence against women in relationship, it was more, it was a dynamic of violence in the incidence of violence. There were men who were abused, but at that point it was almost not possible to talk about it. And I think I was quite sure that this is something that deserved our attention, because even in Russia, the difference in longevity between men and women is one of the highest in the world. It's 13 years. Men live shorter than women. And everybody keeps talking about violence against women. And this is where I realized something is going on. And of course, you know the reason number one, which is usually given to explain that very short lives for men, is alcohol. But alcohol itself doesn't explain it. We wanted to look deeper. What explains that? What causes the deaths among men? Again, no quite many studies on this issue in Russia. And again, this is something that caused me to look into that direction. And then also another issue, which is very much germane to this is violence by women. And this is where I guess I looked in more detail on that issue, what women tell us about their violence. And of course, when I've heard these narratives when women say, oh, I just slapped him in the face, but it's normal. This is feminine behavior. It's nice. This is what is expected for women to do, and it's definitely not violence. And if we propose if you ask the question that, if you imagine that man would do the same to a woman and just slap her in the face, would it be violent? Sure, that's violence. So these very, very double standards in the situation of violence, something that caught my attention. So anyway, when I moved to Canada, I continued my work on dynamics of violence in the incidents of violence. So I'm interested in looking more at what actually happens in those incidents when women can be violent and when men respond, and then when men violent and then women respond and kill abusive husbands. This is the whole dynamic thing. We cannot just say violence against women. Even we cannot say violence against men because it's more or less there is this complexity going on. But anyway, I guess what we know in criminology is that most of the victims of violent crimes are men, including homicide. And what right now we learn more and more is that men are frequent victims of intimate partner violence. something we didn't know for a long time. We haven't talked about it. I guess in the last 10 years, there are more and more studies about male victims of intimate partner violence. And not just in same-sex relationships, but in relationships with women. Women perpetrated violence, female perpetrated violence. This is kind of issue that is very important to study and investigate. And what type of violence men suffer? What we see and what I see in my research and in the research of my colleagues, physical violence. Yes, it exists. Men are slapped, men are pushed, men are beaten, all kind of things. Psychological aggression, sure. Coercive control, yes, it is there. Even though some people in the field believe that it's just probably just a few cases. It's not a problem for men. It is a problem for men, our research showed. Sexual abuse, yes, it is there. And there's also one form of abuse we just started to talk about. It's called legal or administrative abuse against men, something which we haven't talked about much. This is when women use threats against men, saying, I will use the system against you. You'll never see children again. I know they trust me, but I don't trust you. You are a primary aggressor here. So this is what happens, and men step back, and men yield, because they don't want to lose this custody of children. They don't want, because they know the system is set up kind of against them. So we right now learning that men experience lots of violence in their lives. Do they acknowledge it? Do they recognize it? That's a big question. The problem is that when I was joined the international group of scholars in 4 countries, and I represent Canada there, so we study male victims of intimate partner violence, I had difficulties finding these men. Men don't want to go and tell us their stories. They kind of don't even trust scholars. They check from different sources if it's not a joke, if it's not a trick. See, they don't have any trust in the system, even to the researchers. And so it was kind of difficult to do that. And this is what in research literature now is called hard to get population. It's very hard to get them, even to acknowledge that the problem exists and to go and find help. Because those men in our study, and Samantha here, my research assistant who helped me to analyze the cases and narratives on male victims, we found out that these men, when they wanted to find help, what did they get? They were rejected, they were turned away, they were ridiculed, they were blamed for their own victimization. Oh, you probably started first. How can you be a victim in that relationship? So they're laughed at. Oh, you're weak, you're a pussy, are you a man? Can you handle it on your own? The police officers told our men, those male victims. Or they use the system against them. I'll arrest you right now, and then we'll find out what actually happens. So what we know is that the men experience lots of mental health related issues, depression, suicidal thoughts, all kind of things. And this reaction of the society, or these responses of our system, actually exacerbate those psychological state of men even further. Which is why I think that the establishment of the Center for Men is an absolutely great idea. It's long overdue. I think it's very important for young men to know that there is help out there, that they actually can get resources, can get and find men who understand them, men and women who understand them. So it's, I think it's really important because even the international dating violence study we did, these are young men with the average age of 19 who participated in our study. And we found that many of them experienced problems in their relationships, psychological, sexual, physical abuse, but they didn't find help. They were sure that they will never find it. So it's important to start early. I absolutely agree with the presenters here because it's very important to start early. It's very important for them to know there are resources, there are other men who experience these issues. There is help out there because it can help prevent many issues that you can face later in life. This is very important to do. And of course, simply, again, I remember when I did this study on male victims and I talked to men about the experiences, and we did this very interesting online focus groups. Men actually talked to each other and they exchanged email addresses and they say we want to stay in touch because it's important for us to know we're not alone. So there is definitely a need for this center and I very much support it. So I think, and just to finish, I would say that I think it's important not just for men and their families. It's important for the society. It's important for the women who live with these men. And again, for the healthier society overall. Thank you so much.